Good morning. Dear Sasha, you may have some difficulty reading this letter. My children gave me a new typewriter for Christmas, and I am just learning how to use it. My old one dated back to the 50s, and when I hit the keys on that one it went clunk clunk, and when you got to the end of the paper, a loud bell rang. This one has pretty white and green keys, and when you strike them they go tick tick. I could fall asleep. I have a love-hate relationship with this thing. I hate it because it can spell better than I can, and when it beeps, it tells me that I have made a mistake. It also laughs at me. Oh, yes, it does. Tell Nadine not to worry about the tears. The very day that I received your letter, I watched a program on television. It was a documentary about the American Revolution in the 60s. The film depicted the killings of 4 Kent State University students by the National Guard, the bombings at the University of Wisconsin, and many other scenes of violence that took place during the struggle against the war in Vietnam. My first impulse was to turn it off, but I could not. During the last scene, I could feel my face flush, and the emotion pervading my mind brought suppressed memories into sharp focus, and with them came the watery eyes. The television program closed with the father of one of the protesters, who was jailed at the time, saying, "They, the young people, were trying to tell us something, and we just were not listening." The first picture that came to my mind was that of a spectacled FBI agent who came to my home to ask about a young man he was investigating. He told me that the young man was wanted for evading the draft into the military. The agent asked me if I had any information about where the boy was. My truthful answer was that I did not know. And that is what I told the agent. But I knew that I could find out. The agent asked me to notify him if I received any information during the week. I told him that I would. I always tried to maintain my credibility with the law enforcement agencies. They knew exactly where I stood. Once when we demanded a list of protesting students going to a demonstration, I burned the list. I would never give them any information that would help them arrest a nonviolent war protester. But at the same time, I might ask them for some extra time before arresting a draft resistor who might qualify as a legal conscientious objector. The very night before the FBI came to my home, the young man who they were seeking, phoned me. He begged me for my help. I warned him about giving information over my phone, and he quickly hung up. I was sure that my phone was tapped, and the fact that the FBI showed up the next day gave credence to that belief. I always had to be careful about giving them something that they could use against me in the future. I always told them only what I thought they already knew. I lost touch with the boy for a few days, but I was certain that he would contact me again when he could. He did, and we met in a shopping mall parking lot. He was a big, handsome, very athletic 19-year-old boy. The problem was that he had dropped out of college because his girlfriend was expelled for her political activities. That made his draft classification revert to 1A, which meant that he no longer had a student deferment, and he was about to be drafted into the Army. He told me that he was going to leave the country and go to Canada, but he knew that running away or going to jail might kill his father, who had a serious heart condition. He said that he didn't want to hurt his father, whom he loved dearly. He also said that he had no intentions of fighting a war that he did not believe in. He said that he felt like a hypocrite avoiding the draft by staying in college, while those who could not afford college were sent to die in Vietnam. Sasha, I must explain that his father was a retired United States Marine captain who had been wounded twice in the Pacific theater during World War II. The young man had shown me pictures of his father in uniform, and he wore medals down to his chest from the middle of his shoulder. I remember taking a deep breath before I called the boys home and arranged for a secret meeting with his parents at a Catholic retreat not far from my office. I had many friends there among the Jesuit brothers. We often worked together on various projects. When I shook hands with the father, I could see the hatred that he had for me burning in his eyes. He was convinced that I had led his son into making the decision not to serve in the war. I must backtrack again, Sasha, to explain the most difficult aspect of my work in those days. I had to be mentally quick enough to dance back when young people asked me to reason for them and to help them to make their decisions. I never did. I always told them that the decision that they would make would be something that they would have to live with for the rest of their lives. Therefore, that decision had to be made by them. I was there only to give them technical advice about how to carry it out and to provide moral support. I never discussed politics with a young man that I was counseling, but of course I was willing to supply all the information about the war that anyone would want. The most tragic phenomenon of that time was the almost insurmountable generation gap. For 19 years, this father and son lived under the same roof, but they hardly knew each other. The night that we met, they had had 24 hours to get acquainted before the boy was arrested or had to flee. The father presented all the standard arguments early in the evening about why the boy should fight. We must stop communism. When your country calls, you do not ask questions, you serve. The military will make a man out of you. What will our friends think? By 2 o'clock in the morning, I could see the light begin to glow in the parents' eyes. The mother had shed her tears early and had no more. The father, seeing his son's sincerity, and after enduring a long history lesson about Vietnam from his son, finally, through a trickle of tears, said, "There must be another way. Jail or running away will mark you for the rest of your life." That's when I stepped back in for the first time since early in the evening. I could still feel the father's hatred, but it was more controlled. By that time, he understood that his son was not brainwashed by me, but had a total commitment on his own before he ever met me. I carefully explained the option of a conscientious objection. The father's eyes again flamed at me. He hated the very expression. He told me that his vision of a CO was that of a dirty little bearded coward. The mother, seeing an opportunity to keep her son out of jail, convinced the father to help. I called the FBI agent and arranged for the boy to be arrested and released to the custody of his parents until his trial. In the interim, an application was made with the help of his parents. He was able to get alternate service instead of military service. He later married his college girlfriend and went back to school to study and became a teacher. Many years after the war, the father called me. He had seen an article of mine in a local paper and phoned to tell me about his beautiful grandchildren. I knew that he didn't just call me for that, so after exchanging pleasantries, I told him that I was glad that he no longer held any ill feelings towards me. With great emotion, he thanked me for the effort that I had made on behalf of his son and said, "If only we had listened to what those kids were trying to tell us, we could have saved so many lives in Vietnam." I guess I was so full of war-induced patriotism of the 40s that the victory parade was still passing by. I couldn't hear a word that my son was saying until you got us together in that room at the monastery. For me, Sasha, it was an exclamation point to the end of an era, and I could not stop the tears from spilling over. When you told me that you tried to explain to your son that the American-educated Afghanistan leader, Amin, with all of his CIA contacts, was about to help the West with its encirclement policy, and he stormed out of the house, it brought back so many memories of my frustration during efforts to get father and son to communicate on an adult level. I have no way of knowing that your son knew all of that, but I would not be surprised if he did, and considered it irrelevant at the time. You were looking back. He was looking ahead. You with the fear created by past experience, and he with the blind courage of youthful dreams. It is an easy problem to see, but a difficult one to overcome. I know. I've had the same difficulty communicating with my own son. When the father of the young conscientious objector waved his arms and pointed his finger at his son that night in the monastery and parroted the domino theory, he was insulting his own son's intelligence. The young man knew all about the politics involved. He was not living in an unreal world, as his father had said. He was in the new real world. He was not unpatriotic, but he felt like a citizen of a much smaller world than his father had known. The young people then were telling us that old-fashioned nationalism died with World War II. It died with space exploration and international communications. It died with the invention of the nuclear bomb and the intercontinental delivery systems. They did not want to hear politics as usual speeches. They wanted some leader to come forth with a better way of solving political problems than the dropping of napalm. I hope that I have not offended you, Sasha. I am certain that Soviet leaders at that time were convinced that their borders were being threatened and military action was the only course left to them. I am sure that many Americans, including President Kennedy, thought that the domino theory was valid. But that is just the point. Think how many people lost their lives in an East-West struggle that they cared nothing about and had no control over. That is the great tragedy of this century. Whenever I spoke to students then, I could always feel the unified feedback when I touched on East-West relations. Young people were simply sick of it. They were bored with it. They were irritated by it. They thought that Kennedy would bring about the change that they wanted. He did not. Perhaps in his second term, he might have made a better effort. When Gorbachev came here, he received such a warm welcome because so many young people expected that of him. They were demanding a new approach that would not include killing. Sasha, perhaps what the two of us need is not so much an editor as a moderator who would keep both of us on one subject at a time. I wanted to begin this letter by telling you why I wrote the energizing book. I got to feel like the lone wolf howling in the wind. If my howling got louder or more shrill, I feared frightening away more people than I attracted to my cause. We both spoke of the media in our letters, and I remember mentioning the privately owned news media and how they can surreptitiously influence the public. In the area in which I live, we had 4 major newspapers, and each one of them had an owner and or publisher and or member of their board of directors sitting on the board of directors of the utility companies that were building nuclear plants. That, my cousin, is concentrated power and very difficult to penetrate. The attempt is mind control in this country. It isn't as blunt and direct as state-owned news media, but it is a refined, sophisticated, high-tech art form. Anyone who wants to get a different point of view across to the general public must have equal power and or be prepared to be frustrated. I knew that one of the ways to reach a small but very important segment of the public was to get the book published. It gave me a new platform and a significant amount of credibility. I was invited to be a guest on radio talk shows and received more invitations to speak to larger audiences. Another reason why I wrote the book, which is more a working paper for college students, is that often professors would tell me that there is very little written on the subject, and they would ask me for material to leave behind for follow-up discussions. It was worth doing, because I still hear from both students and teachers who are using the book. I feel satisfied with the effort because the main theme, that utility holding companies are a death threat to our economy, is still a very relevant subject. No more nuclear plants are being built, and soon the light will come to the general public that just as Franklin Roosevelt said back in 1933, utility holding companies will make the greatest contribution to our economic demise. The stock market crash of October 1987 was a sign that the bottom card of the greedy holding companies' house of cards is beginning to wobble. In time, it will fall. I am glad that Nadine mentioned the fact that the Constitution of the Soviet Union is speaking to its young people at last. That will be the important focus of the young in both our countries in the next century. One of our presidents said, just before the Great Depression of the 30s, the business of America is business. That statement motivates the present administration, and once again, it has led to economic failure. Taken by itself, there is nothing wrong with the statement, but used as a rationale for obliterating all controls and all benefit programs in favor of hoarding wealth has continued to weaken America's prestige abroad. The most damaging, and I fear the most lasting effect of being a nation with the largest deficit in our history and being a debtor nation with a declining trade influence around the world is long-term negativism. The lowering of American international standing has played a psychological tune in the minds of our youth. Young Americans have had their well-known confidence rattled a bit. Well, perhaps they are still confident, but not as arrogant. They are beginning to look at the structure of the nation, and they are beginning to take a more studied look at their own Constitution. Today they realize that while our Constitution was not fulfilling its promise to all, to all of the citizens, neither was ours. That was the lesson of the 60s that no one wanted to write about. The labor wars, the Palmer raids, the McCarthy years, and the frustration of the anti-war activists and the civil rights freedom fighters crystallized in their minds, the need to make the Constitution real. It is one of the most beautiful documents ever written, and I am sure that you feel the same about yours. I have recently read both the Constitutions of the Soviet Union and the Constitution of the United States. The political structure is different. Yours is becoming more like ours with the general election process. And your adherence to the planned economy methodology is also different. But one can feel the altruism of those who created both documents. They both promise the same freedoms: freedom of speech, freedom of assembly, freedom of religion, and so on. The one area of your Constitution that we, of course, do not have, but continue to strive for, is Article 118, under Fundamental Rights and Duties of Citizens. It says, citizens have the right to work. That is the right to guaranteed employment and payment for the work in accordance with the quantity and quality. Sasha, both you and Nadine would be, as I said before, in the upper strata of the middle class in America financially. However, you would also have to recognize that millions of our workers cannot find jobs today. That may leave them without health benefits, food, or shelter. This often, excuse me. This often is the case for well-educated middle-class workers who have been downsized by companies that are bottom line and concerned mainly with stock sales. It seems a society like ours could do better than that. In this small world, young people everywhere know that while we sneer at the word slave, we perpetuate slavery in other lands. Our consumers can go to a department store and buy inexpensive sweaters made in Bangladesh. They do not want to know how much the makers of that product were paid for their labor. If you told them that Americans are citizens of an oppressive empire and that is why they can buy a sweater so inexpensively, they will become defensive and angry. They just want to enjoy the sweater. I imagine it was always so in all the major empires in history. In many speaking engagements during the 60s, I mentioned the fact that we cannot have segregation in America and deprive blacks the right to vote, and at the same time expect to sell our brand of democracy to the people of color in Southeast Asia. Our system was simply a hard sell abroad. That fact is still stirring in young minds here. Some time ago, I attended a rally to end apartheid in South Africa. A young student at Yale University held up a sign that said, "Economic segregation in America and apartheid in Africa must end." As long as we have such segregation, our morality remains suspect abroad. Nikita Khrushchev's first trip to the United States was loaded with the same baggage, and he knew it. He tried to change the dark side of the Stalinist image of his country, but he could not. Our media would not allow it. When I was marching for freedom and the rights of all citizens in the state of Mississippi, we made camp at a place called Enid Dam. We pitched our huge tent below the great dam, and we could see the militia with their high-powered rifles high above us. Dr. Martin Luther King was beginning to show his annoyance with the inner bickering among the self-appointed leaders. There were calls for black power by the militants and green power by the blacks, who had been admitted into America's middle class, green being the color of the American dollar. They wanted the rest of black America to be more patient. "I am not interested in black power or green power," King said. "I am only interested in moral power. That is the most powerful force on earth." The posturing of the two superpowers and their tactics of intimidation, confrontation, and surrogate wars have all been failures. Korea stands as a monument to that failure. International conglomerates pumped millions into that showplace of Southeast Asia and took billions out. Now Korea is still a divided nation with serious economic problems. Too many people have died in the East-West political maneuvering with too few positive results. I hope the next century will be different and that we will see at long last a race for moral power. Now, Sasha, I suppose that the next step is for us to get together and go over each other's letters and use them as a guideline for a manuscript. It sounds like a lot of work for us to accomplish in just a few short months, but I think that we can do it. I have already thought of a title. What would you think of calling it the Genes of Gregoria? I feel a certain amount of pressure. I want to go there and meet the family and talk to you and see all the places that you have described. I fear that if we are put under a work deadline, we will not be able to do those things. Perhaps we can get someone to take our letters and structure them for us. They can take the subjects and put them in a reasonable order. That will make it easier for us. Now I have some very exciting news. First, you may tell Nadine that neither Marge or I smoke, so we will not be smelling up your apartment when we arrive this spring. Yes, my last set of x-rays shows negative, no signs of my illness, and the doctors say that I do not have to come back to the hospital for 6 months. That means that I have clearance to make the trip. We are both very excited, and I cannot wait to see all of you. With love from all of us here, and with great joy over the prospect that we will soon be together, I remain your cousin David. Chapter 13. Dear David, yesterday our new president returned from his trip to Washington, where he begged your president to save him and to save Russia. Nadine and I decided that we should write this letter to you because we joined those greeting our president's return with an anti-Yeltsin demonstration. We both carried red roses and a Communist Party banner. I wanted to tell you, my cousin, so that you will know that we have come full circle. Nadine and I both feel that we are sliding back to 1914. It is very frightening. We received the copies of the correspondence between you and the editor of the Yeltsin-supporting New York Times magazine here in Moscow. I am so glad that you sent them when you did, because they were the topic of discussion in our last kitchen meeting. Nadine and I are like cosmonauts sailing in space. We decided to join the party demonstrations because we feel our country slipping away. We would both like to leave our positions here and go to Minsk to live near Luba. We do not, because we are not sure of our pensions, and we do not know if we would be able to find an apartment. David, I cannot tell you how bad things are here now, and how much worse they have become since your visit. The other day I wanted to take a picture to send you, but I didn't dare. I was in one of our modern supermarkets, and the only thing in the entire store was a few cases of Pepsi-Cola. People were standing outside waiting in the hopes that some food would arrive. My daughter Sarah stood in line for 2 hours yesterday to buy shoes for her children. When she finally got in, there were no shoes left that were the right size. Nadine and I go for long walks when we can, and we listen to the talk on the streets. We meet old friends who, like us, expect to wake up from this nightmare each morning. To make things worse, David, my old friend, Zacharias Petrovich Karamazov, died of a heart attack 3 nights ago. Nadine has given me the medical explanation of what happened, but I know that he died of a broken heart. It was in his kitchen that we read your letters to the New York Times. That was on Thursday evening. Friday night, he died in his sleep. I am so sorry that you did not get a chance to meet him and his wife when you were here. You would have enjoyed exchanging ideas with Zach. The 4 of us have been close friends since the end of the war, and his death made it seem like my whole world was coming to an end. Vera, his lovely wife, joined Nadine and I in the protest march. She carried 2 red roses and a picture of Zach. We do not grieve over the restructuring of the Union. We wanted that, but we wanted a federation of states under the Union. The states to have more local, Nadine laughs. It is true that when I am emotional, I have trouble finding the English words. I must look it up. The word is autonomy. The states would have more autonomy. We do not grieve over the movement to make the political process more democratic. We wanted that also. But we do grieve over the mad dash of the lemmings into the sea of greed. Oh, David, you are so right. The dragon has returned with a vengeance. It is as though he is angry for being bottled up for so long. Greed is sweeping the country like a firestorm. I want to rush out into the streets and shout, "Stop, stop!" But of course I do not. The dilemma is what we cannot support. The dilemma is that we cannot support the president. We cannot ask for the return of Gorbachev, and we do not have any other leaders ready to take up the challenge. Nadine and I attended meetings with a group of trusted old party friends to prepare for the next elections. if there will be any next elections. David, there are those waiting in the wings who would make Stalin look like a pacifist. No one has an idea about how to stop the present pillage. The party accepts the blame for the fact that young people do not relate to the past or are willing to plan in the future. All they think about is gold chains, wild music, American dollars, and their stomachs. We promised them a beautiful world of love, sharing, culture, and peace. We gave them Brezhnev, corruption, hatred, and the Cold War. I saw a cartoon that showed two roads leading away from Brezhnev. One road led to freedom, the other to sausage. All the people were going in the direction of the sausage. David, once again, Nadine and I are on the outside and fear that we will be purged. At each meeting, people like General Rutskoy are reporting the chaos in the Russian government. We hear daily the stories about the backstabbing by the president's cronies, who are all fighting amongst themselves for the state businesses and the property that they are selling off. It seems like decades ago that we were applauding Gorbachev for saying the separatists threatened to push us off the path of reform and onto the path of confrontation and civil war. That was only in March of 1992. Everything has been sliding downhill so fast since then that we now do face a civil war, and we all feel guilty about letting it get this far. Everyone is closing their eyes and waiting to feel the terrible crash at the bottom, instead of trying to halt the slide. Nadine says that I am rambling. I am trying to say things to you, my cousin, without insulting you at the same time, and I am trying to keep my depression and anger from reaching the paper. The truth is that when I first joined the protest march, I felt out of place, even though there were tens of thousands of us. I felt that I was, at least in part, responsible for the situation that we are in. I felt that we should have been marching in 1987 and 88, when we all felt that it was getting away from us. The reforms were becoming open doors to the King Richard-type crusaders. It is difficult enough to write this letter to you without Nadine pushing and shoving at me. She wants me to erase all that. No. Now she wants me to throw it all away and begin a new, more positive letter. She says that she does not feel guilty, nor does she feel out of place on the march. She says that it is still our job to keep the young people from being led down the wrong road and to prevent them from throwing away all of the good things that millions of Soviets gave their lives for. Yes, she is right. Nikolai and Sarah suffered and won. Their worlds belonged to them. They were so proud of their beautiful city of Minsk. Nikolai always pointed with pride to the many institutes of higher learning, the parks, the statues, and the happy children. It was the great victory of socialism over fascism, and the strength of socialism that built it. He had told me that many times. I cannot see him wearing all of his medals and taking some of the food that is being shipped in from Germany to save our president. Yesterday, Nadine found one of her nurses in the storage room crying. It seems that her mother and father are elderly people who lived through the siege of Leningrad. The father worked for over 30 years in an auto parts factory there. Today, their pensions have been cut. Their apartment rents increased, and the father refused to take any of the food that was being handed out from Germany. Now their city is no more. It is a city of ghosts, the ghosts of the dead, gunned down by the Tsar. It is again St. Petersburg and the palace that epitomizes the devil's greed and the suffering of the working people. It's being refurbished, not just as a beautiful museum, but once again for entertaining. Perhaps they will again have royal balls there. David, it is 1914. When my friend Zach died, his world was shattered. He believed as Nikolai did, with all of his being, in the future of socialism. I still believe in it too, and together we consoled each other that last night that we were together. Today I read that your president has decreed that all state property and collective farms will be turned over to individuals. He did not mention which individuals. Who has the money to buy the land and the buildings and the business that he is selling? He says that he will eliminate all impediments to Western investments. Between the Russian black marketeers and the outside investors, the spoils will be divided, with, we know, the biggest half of the pie going to the owners outside of the country. Divisive religionists, power-seeking preachers of ethnic separatism, racketeers, and the media-created madness to own things have all combined to truly put the inmates in charge of the asylum. And the Western investors seem to have pinned all of their hopes on one of the inmates. I am sorry to write this kind of a letter. Nadine still insists that I tear it up. She reminds me to think about the words of the old priest in Zelengradsk when he told us about facing reality. We both have scientific training, and Zach was a journalist. Vera, a medical technician. So that night, we opened another bottle of Georgia wine, and we all decided to be scientific. We read the New York Times at least twice a week, and sometimes at the university. I can watch CNN television. We know that many of the American media and many politicians claim that your president cannot see what is wrong with his country from where he sits. Perhaps we had much more serious problems here than even those of us who were so close to them could not see. We tried to analyze the situation before it started to deteriorate into the chaos that we have here today. How did we trade between the states? How did trade between the states break down so suddenly? How was Ukrainian wheat kept from Belarusian storage houses? How was Belarusian dairy products kept out of Ukrainian shops? Where did arms come from that are being used by ex-Soviet citizens to kill each other? I am an economist. I am a socialist economist, and I have no answers to those questions. I cannot tell you why it cost me 9,000 rubles to buy an automobile, but I would have to wait a year to get it. If I wanted it right away, I could go to the black market and buy one for 40,000 rubles. That way, I could have the car tomorrow. Where did the black marketeers get the cars to sell? What I am saying, my cousin, is this kind of corruption must be in high places. And that is our inheritance from President Brezhnev. Our ruble is being usurped. It will soon be worthless. There are those who claim that unfair prices were the cause of the trade breakdown between the states, but that is a simple matter that could have been worked out in the State Committee for Prices. The matter of nationalism could have been easily handled by a bit of creative politics. Provocateurs could have and should have been exposed for what they were. Even in Yugoslavia, where they have been struggling with ethnic strife for centuries, the people in the street are asking who started the violence. None of them seem to want it. It is as if an invisible force armed a group of fanatics and told them to kill each other. They do not appear to have any particular political agenda. I am always suspicious of such groups and wonder who they really represent. In Zach's kitchen, we all decided that we would meld our collective brains, feed in the facts, and create a program, just as I do at work. First, I insisted that I read from a magazine article that I wrote for a Swedish journal. I brought it excuse me, because I wanted all of us to remember how we felt and what I was saying just 7 years ago. I wanted to start our collective minds back in 1985 when I wrote the article. I wrote, "We have had the Soviet Union for over 3 decades now, the most consistent price structure in the world. Small increases to the price of food were made in the year 1955 and again in 1962 and have not been raised since. Subsidies for healthcare and education have increased, making them relatively free for all Soviet citizens. The family budget for rent, transportation, and energy have actually decreased over the same period. What then is the problem? What do the Soviet people want? They want what they should have had over 20 years ago at the beginning of the Brezhnev era. Our ruble today is worth 1 1/3 American dollars at the official rate of exchange, and Brezhnev could have made it even stronger. The time to open the ruble to the world market was then. David, the capitalist expression, money talks, may sound strange coming from a socialist, but on the world market, it is a simple truism. We should have made more of an effort to influence the American Congress into realizing that over the long run, the embargo would hurt them as much as it was hurting us. A strong convertible ruble would not only break the embargo, but open trade and our society to the entire world. By 1980, economic conditions were forcing a meltdown of the Cold War, and Brezhnev had the opportunity to bring Soviet society out of the past and into the present. He and his advisors failed. In 1984, our trade with the United States jumped from 1.9 billion rubles to 1.9 billion rubles to 3.1 billion. Most of it was the wheat that American farmers needed to sell as much as we needed to buy. That should have told Americans at the time that the time had come for a fair and truly free world market. This is not as naive as it may appear at first glance. It is not based on any conversion to a moral obligation to be fair on anyone's part. It is simply economic reality. The United States can no longer afford to try to dictate to the world who can buy what and at what price. The Japanese and the European markets will soon end that. The United States cannot continue to carry such a large trade imbalance any longer than we can afford to carry ours. Their economy can no longer afford the arms race, and neither can ours. In 1984, Soviet exports totaled 74.4 billion rubles. That ranked us 5th in the world at times and 7th at others. But 54.4% of that total consisted of energy or energy-related products. Almost all of our imports are in the area of machine equipment and other non-consumer goods. A meager 11.7%, a figure that has not risen in years, makes up the imported consumer goods such as furniture, clothing, cosmetics, and pharmaceuticals. 50 years of an embargo, the arms buildup, and the concentration of arms shipments prevented us from providing our people with the consumer goods that they were demanding. In order to provide them now, we must convert the ruble. We can do that and still maintain our social integrity. The origins of the Brezhnev-inspired corruption can be traced to the ludicrous attempts to do business with major American corporations on a barter basis. It made corruption systemic. We took so many copiers from the U.S. companies, and in turn we gave them another product, which they would sell for hard currency in another country. It was a system made out of the fantasies of those Brezhnev economic advisors who told the aging man only what they knew he wanted to hear. David, since the mid to late 70s, I and many of my colleagues have been working on the problem of how we, at home, can develop the right percentage of central planning and regulation, some free enterprise and property ownership, fixed social programs, and the strong ruble. We have also been working on developing the political adhesive that would hold it all together. It can still be done without any violence. Russians do not want to kill Russians, and Belarusians do not want to kill Belarusians, and that goes for all of the republics. You must remember that socialist economists have no paths to follow. That is what makes our work so exciting. Perhaps I should have said, made our work so exciting. Our president's economic advisors now claim that they want to impose the old humane capitalism, first proposed by the Scottish economist Adam Smith back in the 1700s. It was a failure then, and it has been a failure ever since, when viewed with the general public's welfare in mind. I cannot imagine any Soviet person, let alone an economist, trying to apply the old trickle-down theory as it was described in America during the Reagan administration. We socialist economists must work from the workers' labor up. Your economists do just the opposite. They work from the sale of stock down. That portends disaster for us. Our president is not listening to any of us. He only obeys young wizards like the American, Mr. Sachs, who is on his economic advisory board and has a Rasputin type of hold on his mind. Mr. Sachs teaches at Harvard University in America, and from there he sells our president his shock treatment for the Soviet people. The shock treatment is designed to force us into Western-style capitalism as quickly as possible. and to hell with the pain inflicted on our people. Mr. Sachs feels no pain in his Harvard office. When one looks at an American economy today, one wonders what it is that Mr. Sachs has to sell that is so wonderful that we should suffer so to bring it about. Nadine says that I am making a party speech at David, who is an American and may be offended. My cousin, I did not write this letter because I thought that you wanted to know if our grandchildren will have runny noses, or if our grandchildren still have runny noses, or if we had a severe winter. So let us get back to the night before Zach died. What were all the negatives that we listed? We said that Gorbachev had an opportunity to strengthen the party and socialism, as he often claimed that he would. And instead, he got carried away with being the savior of the world, and he destroyed what he said he would strengthen. Instead of giving the republics the autonomy that they wanted and keeping the family structure, he destroyed the union. Instead of making the ruble stronger, he destroyed it and the entire economy with it. He has unleashed crime, avarice, and violence in a country that had them controlled better than anywhere in the world. He has left the third world countries to the mercy of the West after they looked to us for help and inspiration for all these years. He has, and I think that this is the worst crime of all, broken the spirit of a once proud nation. For that, he got the Nobel Prize and $1 million. Now let us see what Mr. Gorbachev achieved in his 6 years that is positive. Of course, we no longer fear the nuclear war with the West that was the sword hanging over our young people's heads. Why should there be a war? We have already surrendered. We must give him credit for Glasnost, or at least for his attempt at it. Today the media is back as a tool for the present administration. Please do not misunderstand us. We have always been aware of our shortcomings, and of course, we are happy that the arms race is over. But it was not ended because of any new moral uplifting in the West. It was brought to an end because it was bankrupting both of us. A real statesman could have accomplished the same thing without making it appear that we have laid ourselves prostrate in front of our adversaries. There is no face-saving in it for us at all. There should not have been any losers, only winners in the quest for peace. Yes, we both should have been able to feel that we won, because we realize that we do not have to blow up the world to prove which system is best. The militarists who claimed that military parity was the prevention of war were in a sense correct. It follows that the correct thing to do would to have simultaneous reduction of arms. That prospect in the early 80s inspired my colleagues and I. Think what we could do now, we all thought. I planned for the retooling of military plants to produce badly needed modern farm machinery. I saw the exporting of commercial aircraft and the profits to be made from our space station. Oh, there were so many ways that we could have used what our economists called the peace dividend to elevate our standard of living. It would have been much easier for us than it would have been for your economists, because we do not have to factor in downtime and unemployment with investor profits. All that is academic now, and I fear for the worst. The privatization of the farms in Ukraine and what is now called Belarus will be a disaster. While the smiling Mr. Sachs sits in his comfortable office in America, the farm workers in those republics will face the pre-revolutionary starvation once again. Because they will not be able to find quick markets, they will not be able to develop a distribution center in time to avoid a catastrophe. If we must depend on outside investors to put great amounts of money into raising our food, the producing of our oil, the making of our cars and trucks and farm machinery and our railroads and our aircraft, we will not only have sold out our nation, but we will have sold our soul. The investors will demand great returns. Our people will not be able to afford the products that they make, and they will again be slaves. I have heard Yeltsin supporters say that they would not mind if the West turned us into another South Korea. I assure you that this person that said this is one of those waiting in line to buy the people's property. Now Nadine is getting angry, and she insists that I throw this page away. Her imbishness is gone, and her glasses are on. She says that I sound like an old Cold War warrior. Do I, David? If I do, it only proves a point that I wish to make. Gorbachev did not bring us all closer together. I am sure that I speak for many citizens here when I say that I fear America now just as much, if not more, than I did before. When you are badly beaten in a sporting event, you can congratulate the victor and hope that you can improve and do better next time. When you are badly beaten in an economic war and see your people without food, you can only hate those responsible. I fear that hate will soon turn to rage among the Russian people. In your book about the struggle for civil rights, you describe what happened in America, in American cities, when Martin Luther King was murdered. Frustrated blacks, who really did not want to hurt anyone, spent their rage by burning their own communities. I have no idea what direction the Soviet rage will take, but it can only be destructive, unless strong socialist leadership emerges, and soon. Nadine and I plan to go to Minsk soon to visit Luba. She is very depressed these days because she sees so many young people beginning to live in the streets and the elderly suffering from trying to live on poor diets. She tells us that young, talented, and educated people that she knows are now selling trash to the tourists at the train stations and the hotels. I look forward to going there and sitting on a bench outside the House of the First Congress to reread Jean-Jacques Rousseau. As a young man, I could quote from my father's books. The general will always be right, but the judgment that guides it is not always enlightened. It is therefore necessary to make people see things as they are, and sometimes as they ought to appear, to point out to them the right path that they are seeking, to guard them from private wills, and to help them see how times and places are connected, to induce them to balance the attraction of immediate and sensible advantages against the apprehension of unknown and distant evil. As a young man, I did not understand those words as clearly as I do now. It is time for me to also reread some of Karl Marx's works. I have grown far away from him over the last 20 years, telling myself that Marx did not live in our time, and that the world has shrunk considerably since he developed his theories. However, it is the philosophy, not the mechanics, that we should return to. As the exploitation of one individual by another is put an end to, the exploitation of one nation by another will also be put an end to. In proportion as the antagonism between classes within the nation vanishes, the hostility of one nation to another will come to an end. David, what are we to do, if not work toward that end? Can any of us call ourselves religious? Can we really call ourselves democratic? How can we ever expect to achieve the one family world that we all dream of? Nadine will read and translate this in bed tonight. I know that she hesitates to offend you, but that she does not agree with everything that I have said, but that she does agree with everything that I have said, because I have heard her say it many times. Our affection for you has grown since your visit, but your invitation to your home has not been forgotten. I am sure that you realize that an old soldier like me cannot sit in Connecticut, USA, while his own country is disintegrating. With the hope that the Federation can be restored under socialism, I remain with affection. Nadine has made another correction here. I mean to say, we remain with affection. Sasha and Nadine. Chapter 14. Dear Sasha and Nadine, I feel the anger and frustration burning in every word of your letter. I have been in that same state ever since I returned from Belarus. No, I must say that I have been in that state ever since I first heard that young nationalist in Minsk shouting the words of Hitler. It is time that we rid Belarus of Jews and communists once and for all, he said. I was horrified. My visit was such a joyous experience up to that moment. For months after I returned, I could not write anything. I presented my notes on Soviet publishing to the Nation magazine, as I said that I would. For some reason that I do not understand, they chose not to use them. The demise of Soviet publishing, and who and what is responsible for that demise, is a very important subject. I am an American, and as such I do not feel that I have the right to tell Russians or Belarusians which kind of political structure they should choose. However, as a member of the human race, who sees the entire world beginning to march backwards, I too feel that I must act. Sasha, I do not know how to answer your letter. I am not an economist, and as you pointed out, we certainly have our troubles here. I did not live in the Soviet Union under Brezhnev. It was so difficult in those years to try to get through the constant barrage of childish propaganda that most Americans didn't even bother to do it. We Americans like to make things as simple as we can, and therefore our historians have most of us believing that poor old Herbert Hoover was to blame for the Great Depression, but he inherited the same kind of corrupt, avaricious, and politically disenchanted society that Gorbachev did. When I was taking treatments at the hospital, one of the female technicians told me that the worst part of her job is when a patient hears that fearful word, cancer, and just quits on her. There remains very little that she can do for such a patient. That defeatist attitude is what too many of the American people adopted after the frightful crash of 1929. They quit on the system. Roosevelt did not turn the economy around, but he did get the people to believe again. Socialists say that Roosevelt did nothing more than delay the inevitable. Perhaps after 6 wars, 3 major and 3 minor, and countless recessions, they may be proven right, and America will have to have its own perestroika. I feel that Gorbachev was not able to garner the affections of his own people because he relied too much on the West, making his own people feel inferior. He conveyed the feeling, as Yeltsin did, that Russians couldn't solve their own problems without help from the Americans. If he needs the guidance of the West and begs for help, he diminishes his own credibility as a leader. I also have trouble writing what I feel now because I do not want to express any negativism. But when Nadine referred to you as an old cold warrior, it made me shudder. I have suppressed the same fears that you expressed, because I know that if enough people say them out loud, we will see the last inch of the so-called peace dividend vanish. Yes, I agree that such a thing can happen, and it will be accelerated by the heavy-handed outside investors. They have long dreamed of Russian profits. Take that dream away now, and you will again see intervention. On January 25, 1992, I was asked to address a group of students at the University of Hartford. It was just after the nation celebrated Martin Luther King Day. I was asked to describe some of my experiences during the civil rights struggle in the 60s and relate them to present conditions. A black man who had joined the movement in Alabama as a teenager was also on the speaker's stand. At the end of his talk, he said, "Today I feel that all of our efforts were for nothing, because more black people are worse off today than they were then." Sasha, I am sure most of the people in the audience became choked with emotion. I was going to say similar negative things, but the feedback from the audience told me that they really didn't want to hear it. At my age, it is very easy to become negative and cynical, but when you are back in the fight and looking at those young faces, it would be criminal to convey such thoughts. Instead, I told them how we all felt that we were so close to winning. I tried to instill that feeling in them, and I told them that we could again regain that momentum. I read to them from a piece that I wrote for the Hartford Courant newspaper back in March of 1978. It was the 17th anniversary of the Selma Civil Rights March. Oh, Sasha, I was so positive then. The last paragraph of the article reads, "FBI men sat in their cars parked down the route. Federal marshals peered from the windows of their automobiles. The state militia with bayonets drawn lined the road, and regular army troops checked the road ahead for landmines. And through it all we marched, this ragtag conglomeration of humanity, the likes of which I have never seen before. Intellectuals and illiterates, business suits and dirty denims. Men and women, young and old, agnostics, priests, nuns, rabbis, black and white, ambled along behind one lone American flag down that narrow road in Alabama, and I wasn't one bit ashamed of the tears that rolled down my cheeks. I applauded that beautiful mass of love coming down that hill, and I know that this army could never be defeated. For to defeat them, one must destroy all of humanity." Look at us now. The richest 5% of Americans now have more income than the bottom 40%. The richest 1% has more wealth than the bottom 90%. That, to me, spells defeat. but it is just the loss of a battle, not the war. The war goes on. Yes, racism is once again getting out of control. Efforts to restructure the world market by the European cartel may or may not be successful. But the threat remains, and our ever-increasing national debt is too heavy a burden for us to carry. The wealthy always want to lower that debt by cutting the services to the poor and to the working poor. Your astute observation of Marxist ideology being drawn from a mind created in a world when oceans, mountains, and rivers isolated entire cultures and world population was counted in millions, not billions, is well taken. Yes, you are right. Humanism is the issue today, not military or political tactics. Politics aside, what we see on this people-infested planet is the ever-widening economic and education gaps that are slowly erasing the middle class everywhere. That can only lead to more violence. We can hope that what will rise from the ashes this time will be the long-awaited humanitarianism that will permeate the minds of all people. Sasha, I thought that when I reached my age, I would just be able to write and write. But like you, I cannot sit back and just watch while the lives of my parents and my brothers and sisters and all the millions of others who fought the good fight for equality and justice may go for naught. When I look at those young faces at the university, I realize that they are going to need all the help that they can get, even from an old warhorse like me. Marge and I were so looking forward to having you and Nadine here. Please do not say that you will not come. I too remember that wonderful night on the train and how we talked about sifting out the bad and retaining the good from both systems. We spoke of economics, politics, and justice. Come to Connecticut, Sasha and Nadine. Come and we can set goals for ourselves. We can fill our days with theory and our nights with theater. Come this spring, because I fear that this summer will bring violence to our city, streets, and hatred to our communities, and frustration in our homes. Come now. The opportunity may never present itself again. I fear for Russia, and I fear for America. We are two leaderless, floundering societies, paying dearly for the mistakes of the past. Yet we both seem destined to make the same mistakes again. I close with this thought for the two of you that was written by Dag Hammarskjöld. In our era, the road to holiness necessarily passes through the world of action. With love from all of us, David Truskoff.